What if I told you Angie Stone didn't just die in a car accident, but was literally silenced? She had receipts, she had names, and just weeks before her sudden death, Angie went public, blasting major record labels for robbing black artists blind. She said it straight. The industry owed her millions. And then, bam, she's gone. A single car accident, no major headlines, no deep investigations, just a quiet funeral and a whole lot of unanswered questions. So, are we really supposed to believe this was all just a coincidence? Because the timing, suspicious, the silence from the industry, deafening, and the things Angie was starting to say before she passed, let's just say, she was becoming a problem for some very powerful people. This isn't just another celebrity tragedy. This is the story of a soul legend who knew too much, spoke too loud, and maybe paid the ultimate price for it. And once you hear what she was exposing, it might change how you see the R&B industry forever. This one spills all the tea, honey. So make sure you listen to the end because we're about to blow the lid off on this one. This whole thing is good. For most people, Angie Stone was just that smooth, underrated neo-soul queen with a few hits in the early 2000s. You probably remember Wish I Didn't Miss You, right? That breakup anthem that hit way too hard back in the day? Yeah, that Angie Stone. But here's where the misconception starts. People assume she was just another R&B singer who had her moment and faded out quietly. No drama, no mess, just talent and vibes. Except that couldn't be further from the truth. What most people don't know is that Angie Stone had been in the music game long before her solo career took off, like late 70s, early hip-hop era, founding member of The Sequence, the first female rap group signed to a major label. She helped lay the foundation for what the industry is built on today. But did she ever get properly credited or compensated? Not even close. And that's the kicker. Behind her calm, soulful image, Angie was battling a music industry that, according to her, chewed her up and spat her out. While fans thought she was living off her hits and relaxing in luxury, she was allegedly chasing down unpaid royalties, fighting off lawsuits, and calling out shady execs who'd made millions off her work. But nobody was listening until she made them. In late 2024, Angie Stone did something most artists never do. She went public. She took to social media and live streams, claiming she was owed serious money from Universal Music Group and calling out industry gatekeepers by name. Her tone wasn't just disappointed, it was furious. And when an artist starts pointing fingers at the suits behind the curtain, that's when things start getting dangerous. This wasn't just an aging artist venting online. This was someone with decades of receipts and absolutely nothing left to lose. But here's where things get even more twisted. Just weeks after those public statements, Angie Stone was gone. A freak accident. And the industry? Practically silent. The question is, why? Why was someone with so much history, so many hits, and so many accusations buried under whispers and headlines that disappeared in 24 hours? Let's break it all down, because what she knew and what she tried to expose might have made her a target. Here's the hot take no one wants to say out loud. Angie Stone's death wasn't just a tragic accident. It was convenient. Too convenient. Think about it. Right after publicly dragging Universal Music Group and naming names tied to decades of exploitation, she ends up dead in a car crash, alone, no foul play suspected, no real media attention, no outrage from the same music industry that loved using her voice but hated paying her. Nah, something doesn't add up. Just weeks before her death, Angie was on Instagram Live looking directly into the camera and saying, "They've been robbing me for decades. And I'm not the only one." She wasn't talking in riddles. She was dropping breadcrumbs. She even said she was working on a documentary, one that would expose how black artists from the 70s, 80s, and 90s were systematically underpaid, uncredited, and shut out of royalty deals by major labels. It was shaping up to be a bombshell. And then suddenly, boom, she's gone. And let's talk about the accident. Reports say she was in a car with multiple people, but only Angie died. No police follow-up, no deep investigation, just nothing. People moved on like it was an afterthought. Meanwhile, her final words on social media are still out there, talking about lawsuits, threats, and how she was tired of being quiet. This is where the hot take hits hard. Angie Stone was about to blow the whistle on an entire system, and that made her a problem. A liability, a threat to people who have everything to lose if the truth came out. Because if someone like Angie, respected, legendary, unfiltered, started peeling back the curtain on the money, the contracts, the lies, oh, it wasn't just her story at stake. It would have opened the floodgates. The Angie Stone documentary could have been the tipping point that forced a real reckoning in the music industry. So ask yourself, if that documentary never sees the light of day, who benefits? And what if, just what if, someone made sure it never would? Let's go deeper, because this wasn't Angie's first time throwing elbows at the industry. She had been sounding the alarm for years, but most people just didn't want to hear it. Why? Because Angie wasn't the flashy, drama-chasing type. She wasn't a headline magnet or a viral meltdown waiting to happen. She was too real, too seasoned, and way too smart to play the industry's little games. But let's not forget, this woman knew everyone. She'd worked with D'Angelo, Alicia Keys, Lenny Kravitz, Missy Elliott. The list is ridiculous. She wasn't just some side act. She was the backbone of the neo-soul movement. And behind the scenes, she was ghostwriting, arranging, mentoring, but her name was often nowhere to be found on the credits. And you want to guess what that means? No credits equals no royalties. And she knew it. She knew she'd been ghosted on more than just writing credits. She was being erased from the legacy she helped build. And by the time she started publicly calling it out, she wasn't asking nicely anymore. She was demanding her flowers and her check. She'd say things like, "They gave me crumbs while eating steak off my plate." And people would laugh, like it was a punchline. But she wasn't joking. She was exposing a pattern. Now here's where things get messy. Because Angie didn't just have dirt on the music execs. She had stories about your favorite artists too. Allegedly unpaid collabs, fake friendships, and some big-name stars who made it big standing on her back, then ghosted her completely. And let's not forget the label lawsuits. She once sued her former label over withheld royalties, quietly, privately. But after years of being ignored, she made it public. And once she went public, that's when the vibe changed. Suddenly, she wasn't being booked for tribute shows. Industry friends stopped picking up the phone. Projects fell through. She was blackballed, but she still kept talking. She even hinted in interviews that she was planning to name names in a tell-all book. So let's be real. When you're a woman in the music business, especially a black woman speaking out against the machine, you're not just ignored, you're targeted. And in Angie's case, she might have gotten too close to truths that certain people never wanted to see daylight. If you still think this is just conspiracy talk, let's look at what happened after Angie died. Her daughter, Diamond, jumped on Instagram less than a week later, and the internet lit up. Not with grief, not with tributes, but with drama. Allegations were flying left and right. People accused Diamond of trying to profit off her mother's death, cashing in on GoFundMes, rushing to control her estate, and allegedly blocking Angie's longtime friends and industry peers from attending the funeral. The whole thing looked messy, too messy for someone who just lost her mother. But here's the wild part. That chaos? It distracted everyone from what Angie had been fighting for before she died. Suddenly, the headlines weren't about her battle with Universal Music Group or the documentary she said was already in motion. They were about Diamond. The narrative flipped overnight, from justice for Angie to Family Feud goes viral. And if that feels like a calculated misdirection, you're not alone. Even Tyler freaking Perry, spoke out. At Angie's memorial, he didn't mince words. He said she'd been exploited, underpaid, and disrespected by an industry that had no problem using her voice until it no longer served them. He said it to a room full of people, industry people, and the media barely covered it. Like they didn't want his words echoing too far outside that building. This isn't a woman who faded away quietly. This is a woman who was getting louder, who was gathering receipts, who was making noise about a system that routinely chews up black artists and spits them out when they demand what they're owed. And yet, when she died, no tribute at the Grammys, no industry-wide tribute montage, just a couple posts, a handful of IG lives, and then silence. Are we really supposed to believe that's just oversight? Or did the powers that be want to erase the final chapter of Angie Stone's story before people started asking questions? Because the more you look at it, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a silencing, a cover-up disguised as a coincidence. Now let's talk about the timing, because timing, in this case, is everything. Angie Stone passed away on March 1st, 2025. That's barely 2 months after she made a very public declaration that she was preparing to take legal action against major industry players for what she called decades of financial sabotage. Not years, decades. She claimed there were contracts, forged signatures, and shady royalty arrangements that were still being enforced to this day. And she wasn't just ranting, she was ready to name names. In fact, one of her last interviews included a chilling line, "If anything happens to me, y'all know why." Let that sink in. Angie knew she was poking the bear. She knew how dangerous it was to go up against the music machine, especially as a woman who didn't have the protection of a major label anymore. She'd been blackballed once already, and yet, she kept pushing. She said she was tired of watching her peers die broke, while the people behind the curtain counted checks off their catalogs. And speaking of those peers, let's not forget how many artists from Angie's era died mysteriously or in silence. Phyllis Hyman, Tina Marie, Vesta Williams, all powerful voices who passed suddenly or under murky circumstances after years of battling the industry. Angie knew that pattern. She talked about that pattern. Now here's another weird twist. People close to Angie claimed she was in good health, active, and even planning a comeback. She was working on new music, finishing that documentary, and getting ready to tour with a handful of other 90s icons. She even joked about how the industry wasn't ready for her receipts. But what happened to that music? The documentary? The tour? Poof! Gone, like it never existed. And you know what really seals this whole thing? No autopsy report was released to the public. No police report with real detail. Not even a clear timeline of events from that night. Just a quick, "she's gone," and the world moved on. So again, was this just a sad loss? Or did Angie Stone get too close to something the industry wanted to keep buried? Because when someone dies at the exact moment they're about to expose corruption, you don't need to be a conspiracy theorist to raise an eyebrow. Let's zoom out for a second, because this isn't just about Angie. This is about a pattern. The music industry has a long, ugly history of silencing artists, especially black artists, once they start asking the wrong questions. And all you have to do is look. Prince writing "slave" on his face, gone. Michael Jackson speaks on Tommy Mottola, erased. TLC filing for bankruptcy at the peak of their career, Left Eye, has a car crash. Aaliyah, plane crash. Even artists like JoJo and Kesha got legally gagged for speaking out about abuse and sabotage. One thing is certain, this system protects itself, and if you go up against it, you either get buried in legal red tape or just buried, period. Now here's the part that really makes you think. Angie Stone had been dropping hints about a secret society of execs and gatekeepers who manipulate careers behind the scenes. She even referenced an inner circle that controls who wins, who gets nominated, and who gets erased. Most people brushed it off, thought she was being dramatic. But the people close to her, they say she wasn't just talking trash, she was revealing real things, dangerous things. And this inner circle? It benefits from keeping the spotlight off artists like Angie, artists who helped build genres like R&B and hip-hop but don't sell in the mainstream machine anymore. They're quietly pushed out, their catalogs hoarded by labels, and their stories swept under the rug unless there's a biopic to cash in on. Let's not forget, Angie Stone's voice helped shape D'Angelo's entire sound. She was the creative force behind Brown Sugar. You'd think she'd be celebrated for that, right? But D'Angelo's the legend. Angie, she's the footnote. It's not just erasure, it's strategic erasure. And when she finally tried to reclaim that credit, when she threatened to expose contracts, backroom deals, and exploitation that spanned decades, she was dead within weeks. So ask yourself, if this was any other high-profile artist, wouldn't there have been press conferences, investigations, memorials on every award show? Instead, Angie's death was treated like background noise, quiet, controlled, sanitized. Which brings us to the real question. Was Angie Stone's death just a tragic coincidence? Or was it the final chapter in a story the industry never wanted told? Because if what she said was true and the receipts were real, then maybe she wasn't just another artist. Maybe she was the threat they needed gone. So here we are, 1 month since Angie Stone's death. No mainstream tributes, no justice, no answers, just an uncomfortable silence and a lingering sense that something ain't right. Because when you piece it all together, her public accusations, the missing royalties, the documentary that never got finished, the shady aftermath, the timing of it all, it doesn't just feel suspicious, it feels orchestrated. Angie wasn't just an R&B singer, she was a pioneer, a fighter, a woman who knew too much and refused to stay quiet. And whether you believe this was a calculated cover-up or a tragic accident, one thing is painfully clear. The industry didn't give her the respect she deserved when she was alive. And it sure as hell isn't doing it now that she's gone. At the time of her passing, Angie Stone's estimated net worth was reportedly under $500,000, $500,000, for someone who helped shape an entire genre. Let that sink in. But maybe that's the real legacy the music industry leaves behind. Not just the soundtracks to our lives, but the silence it enforces when artists fight back. Angie will be remembered for her voice, her soul, and her refusal to be erased. But if her story vanishes into the background, then the system wins, again. So here's the challenge. Don't let them bury this. Don't let them rewrite the ending. Because if what happened to Angie Stone doesn't wake people up, then who's next? They silenced her voice, but they can't silence the truth she left behind.